our top story today, protests still taking place in Wisconsin. And we're going to be following this story very closely with a little bit of a different angle, a more broad discussion about all of these events unfolding in the Midwestern state. Now, the saying goes, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But in this case, it is broke. As Governor Scott Walker recently pointed out, it is not just his state that's running out of money. In fact, Wisconsin is just like nearly every other state across the country. And once something is broke, well, you got to fix it, right? So now all this rhetoric about cutting spending, about balancing the budget that we've been hearing throughout these past several years, now we're seeing it turn into reality. We're seeing the after effects in Wisconsin right now. But could this be just the tip of the iceberg? And what happens next? Well, radio host Tony Katz is talking to us in Los Angeles. For more, and Brave New Foundation political director Derrick Crowe is in Texas for us. And the big picture is Tom Hartman here in the D.C. studios. Gentlemen, thank you all for being here. It's going to be a great discussion. Tony, I want to start with you. Let's get right into it. These people on the streets, whether they be in Egypt or China or Madison, Wisconsin, do they have a right to demand change? In other words, do these tens of thousands of people on the street speak for everybody?
Well, no group of people speaks for everybody, and as always, it's a pleasure to be here. But they could indeed speak for specific groups. The people of Wisconsin, comparing them to the people of Egypt and to the people of China, remember, the people of China, if they try to speak out, they'll be thrown in jail. They have no rights. The Jasmine Revolution being squashed as we speak. The people of Egypt, amazingly so far, doing well. Hopefully, they'll actually be able to live past one man, one vote, one time. In Wisconsin, you have the unions, the public employee unions, that actually believes that they're entitled to everything they get because of their own existence. And then you've got the majority of people of Wisconsin, the taxpayers, who know they can't afford the bill anymore. And that's what all this is about. It's about the unrealistic expectation of the public employees union versus the reality of the pocketbook of the people of Wisconsin.
Tony, it's so interesting how anytime there's a mention of China, it really makes your blood boil. But Tom, I'm going to turn it over to you. Who is it
Good
really?
Memory.
Who is it really that these masses represent? I mean, where are the pro-Walker protesters? I mean, they voted him in. He said he was going to do this. They said, we want you in there. Some of them came out this past weekend, but where are they en masse saying this is what we voted for, this is what we need to balance the budget?
You got busted in by Americans for Prosperity and all the money.
Well, there were over 10,000
Hey,
people
Tony, I'm going to turn it over
to the rallies.
Tony, you had your chance to speak. Now I'm going to turn it over to Tom, and then you can comment on China just a little bit, okay? Is that okay? All right, great.
Sorry, I thought it was to me.
No problem. Tom and Tony sound a lot alike.
They do.
These are average working people who gave up $100 million last year, who this time around have said, we will give you everything. They have acceded to every single one of the governor's demands, except for the right for collective bargaining, which means collective bargaining is really simple. It means that all the people in the union get together and, as a democracy, determine what their position is on something, you know, and then one of their representatives goes and negotiates with their employer. And what the governor is trying to do is what Tony is complaining about in China, which is if somebody stands up and speaks out, we're going to threaten them with the National Guard. If somebody, you know, I mean, this is insane. The right to collective bargaining is the core right of a union. Without it, there's no reason for it to exist. Unions brought the middle class to the United States, and this is nothing more or less than two very simple things. One, an effort to continue the destruction of the middle class in the United States. We're down to the point now where there's very little middle class left. We have the working poor, as most people. Wealth is, you know, 80% of all wealth since Reagan's presidency has gone to the top of 1% of Americans, increased in wealth. And
Tom, let me stop you just right
two,
there.
They're trying to defund the Democratic Party.
Noam Chomsky actually said the Democrats aren't going to do anything about this because the Democrats want to destroy the unions too. How do we make sense of that? Just very briefly.
The Democratic Party has two factions. Back when Clinton first came in, they realized that Reagan's war on unions had stripped us from 35% unionization down to in the 20s. There wasn't that much money there anymore, so they had to come up with some way to get some cash so they came up with the DLC. Let's become sort of like the Republicans and go to the corporations and get money. And that is a schism in the Democratic Party. There's the old-fashioned labor Democrats, and then there's the let's be in with the corporate Democrats. And I think that that's probably what Noam Chomsky was talking about.
I want to bring Derrick into the conversation, and to use your line, let's look at the big picture here. Derrick, is this an isolated incident, or is this really a sign of things to come? That it's not just about, Wisconsin here. I mean, Ohio, Tennessee, many other states preparing similar legislation here. So is this, again, a sign of bigger things to come?
Well, I think it's a sign of a very huge problem across the country in that our spending priorities are totally out of whack with the priorities of the American people. We made a comparison in an article that my boss, Robert Greenwald, just wrote that showed that if you brought just 150 troops home from Afghanistan, you could beat Governor Walker's savings on his plan. That his plan would save about $300 million over 2 years for the state government of Wisconsin. If you brought home 150 troops from Afghanistan in 2 years, you'd beat his savings. And when you look at what we're spending on the war in Afghanistan specifically, you can see that we have a lot of national resources apparently, but our elected officials are spending them in ways that are out of whack with people's priorities. If you look at the polling right now, you can see that most Americans, including most Republicans, most Democrats, and most independents, want Congress to act this year to bring those troops home. And coincidentally, at the end of this year, state fiscal aid to the states from the federal government from Recovery Act funds is going to run out, and that's going to make state budget problems even worse. So just the hypothetical we threw out there in this article was, why don't you end the Afghanistan war, which nobody loves in the United States, and use that money to reinvest here at home in the United States?
Right, but that's a whole different, discussion altogether. That's a discussion of where do we cut, where do we not cut. I mean, Tony, will that ever happen? Can we make that comparison and say, hey, we're spending about, $1 million per soldier in Afghanistan? If we bring all of these troops home, then we can afford to, give the unions what they want. I mean, that's not going to happen, right?
And it's not a real comparison, not one that I would get in. The federal government is going to deal with the war in Afghanistan, and Governor Scott Walker is going to deal with the $3.6 billion budget gap in Wisconsin. Your question earlier, and I thought you said my name, and I apologize for interrupting earlier, in terms of where were all the people who support Governor Walker, they're working. They don't have time to get fake doctor's notes and sit on the street and be part of an illegal action. They're actually out there making a living. Never forget that the people out there making a living are the ones who pay for these people in the unions. And this union does not do any good. And by the way, I think we're all starting to realize that unions did have a place in America, but the expiration date is up. And now the unions are not there to actually protect kids or to make it better. They're there to take more money and take more power. That's what they do. They no longer help, they hurt.
Tom, would you agree? Unions, good or bad for America at this point in time? Not historically, but right now.
Unions are still the one thing that is standing between absolute corporate power and their power over our politicians and the middle class in America. What Tony is advocating is returning to Charles Dickens' England. It's an oligarchy.
Oh, good Lord.
Come on, what are you talking about? These people are, these employees in Wisconsin are actually making less than people with similar educations in the public sector, in the private sector rather. They have given back. They are doing everything they can to work this thing out. All they want is the right to have a union. And you guys who are, the whole laissez-faire crowd, the bottom line of it is you're saying you want to turn this country into a kingdom where the emperors and the mini kings are corporate CEOs and everybody else is screwed. What Scott Walker wants by doing away with collective bargaining is the ability to go to any individual employee in the state and say, hey, you are going to lose your pension. You're going to lose your vacation. You I don't like. You can leave right now. Whatever he wants. And that's not how it should be. It's not the American way, Tony. That's the Chinese way.
Tony, who's going to be there, as Tom said, to protect the little guy so that it doesn't become this corporate state that many folks say it's already becoming? Tony, who's there protecting the little guy?
First of all, it's Governor Scott Walker who's trying to protect 10,000 to 12,000 jobs in Wisconsin. It's the employees union that won't come to the table. They may claim they'll come to the table, but there's no table yet. And as for this idea that these poor, defenseless teachers who are doing so much to give back, they picked a career that worked for them and worked for the way that they want to live. Whoever said that it also comes with lifelong health benefits that you don't have to pay into? Who said it comes with pensions that you don't have to pay into? into. These are the conversations. Why do you think that because you're a teacher, you're entitled to whatever you want, whenever you want, or you're a public employee of any kind? They're not a special subset class. They're not more important than people who have their own business and work for a living. They're not more important than entrepreneurs. They're not more important than capitalists. They're just not more important.
See, it's the capitalists who are important. That's who's important.
Well, exactly. But Derrick, look, the state Senate president said they're going to reconvene tomorrow. Okay, they're hoping that at least one Democrat is going to show up, which is basically all they need to continue this process. First of all, will that happen, or will the Democrats continue to hide out? And the other question we have to ask is, who's sort of supporting this hideout? I mean, are they getting orders from top Democrats, whether they be here in Washington, D.C., or in charge of other organizations?
Listen, let's address that point, but then I want to come back to a point you made a second ago. These people who are hiding out, as you put it, are making the only move that's available to them to protect the rights of workers in their state. They're not part of some shadowy conspiracy. What they're doing is to take the most important action they can take right now to prevent legislation from being passed that would hurt the workers in their state. Now, I want to respond to something that was just said, that teachers think they're more important than other people. My wife here in Texas is also facing severe budget cuts. And I just learned that my wife, at the end of this year, is going to lose her job. Now, just as an anecdotal example, my wife has to bring work home every day from work. She works way longer than the regular hours. She has a master's degree. She has educated herself and gotten every certification that the state has asked from her. And what she's being told is that the state would rather give tax cuts than they would educate our children with highly qualified teachers. And the same thing is happening in Wisconsin. Now, the governor convened a quote-unquote emergency session to push through tax cuts and breaks for people who, may or may not be necessary, but you can't say that this just happened out of nowhere when the governor's agenda is responsible for more than half of this deficit. And earlier you said that this is all different issues, but what we're trying to make the point at Brave New Foundation and Rethink Afghanistan is we have plenty of national resources to do the things we want to do to get this country back on track. The problem is that our leaders are spending them in ways that don't fit with our priorities. Now, just as the example again, if you cut the Afghanistan war spending just 150 troops, not even 1% of the troops we have over there, you could cover this state's budget deficit that Walker's trying to address. And if you brought all the troops home, you would have hundreds of billions of dollars every year that could be reinvested here in the United States, getting state budgets corrected and getting people back on their feet.
What I meant, of course, is that, that's really not part of the dialogue on the Hill, save a few lawmakers like Congressman Kucinich or Congressman Paul, who say, hey, if we do bring the troops home, we can finance different projects here at home. But besides them, they don't really talk about that much. But Tom, let's talk about the top Democrat here. And Derrick mentioned this, Barack Obama. He did call this an assault on unions. But as far as his response goes, was he too forceful, not forceful enough? Is this all going to come back to him in 2012?
I think he's relatively conflict averse. I mean, we've been watching him for 2 years now, and he doesn't get into fights. He works more behind the scenes, I think.
It's not going to hurt him though, because these are the people.
It may well, and I think that the thing right now that his best political strategy, rather than going to Madison and being seen as descending into a statewide brawl when he really needs to be at the level of the president of the nation, what he needs to be doing, or he and Harry Reid and Nancy Pelosi need to be doing, is trying to, they can do it in the Senate right now, and try to do it in the House, is reintroduce the Employee Free Choice Act. And just say, okay, you guys have declared war on unions. There's 5 states that are doing this. They are funded by the Koch brothers and the Bradley Foundation. We got these billionaires who are promoting all of these ideas that are basically trying to defund the Democratic Party and end the middle class in America. We're going to bring that back, and we're going to put the Employee Free Choice Act card check on the table.
You think that they can do that? And Tony, I want to also address this question to you, because it's a broader question. It's not just about whether or not Democrats and Republicans can work together in Wisconsin, but also here in Washington, D.C. I mean, we see this gridlock, partisan politics. Is the divide too deep at this point? Is it worse now than ever before?
I don't know, because I think if you ask people in certain spots in history, and you can ask Tom and ask Derrick the same question, I think they would all say, oh yeah, it's way too deep. And then in some ways it gets better, and in some ways it gets worse. Any move, however, towards card check is ridiculous. Taking away the ability of people to vote secretly without somebody over their shoulder is just abhorrent, and I give it no credence whatsoever. To Derrick's point about his wife and the work that teachers do, In no way am I saying that teachers don't do work. What I'm saying is that they are not a subset class that deserves even more special breaks than any other class. Teachers work hard. Good teachers are hard to find. One of the worst things that unions do is protect bad teachers because they want to keep collecting those union dues. And therefore, the good teachers actually get marginalized and pushed out. It is one of the horrors of the system. And the three of us, three very different people, and I don't think Tom and I agree on even how to spell his name, 2 M's, 1 M, the H, we have no idea. We would agree that teachers actually need a lot more respect. They need to be able to be professionals in their classroom, and absolutely there is a problem here that must be fixed because we do have to make sure if we're going to have free public education, we do it right.
Tom, I'm not going to, question you about how you spell your name. I'm perfectly fine with it. But, a lot of people are asking, would the Democrats at this point, this goes back to what Chomsky said, would they let unions just disappear? And if so, because what we have right now are public sector unions. I mean, the private sector has been down for a little while now. And what would happen if so?
If they do, it's the end of democracy in America. I think
wow,
that we are
really
at a pivotal point here where we are balanced on the edge of a corporate run, a transnational corporate run, I would add now, with Citizens United saying that Chinese corporations can come into America and buy U.S. elections, buy U.S. politicians. I have a friend who's a member of Congress, or who was a member of Congress, and decided, he told me the story, he said the reason why he decided not to rerun in this last election was a corporate guy came into his office, sat down and said, I got a little less than $1 million to spend in your district. I can use it to make you or destroy you, your choice. And at that moment,
but the Republicans would say the unions are buying, politicians are buying the Democrats.
And so are the large corporations. But the unions are such a small fraction of the wealth pool out there that there's no way that they can compete with these transnational corporations and these billionaires. The average income of the top 20 hedge fund managers on Wall Street is $2 billion a year. One of those guys could take out the President of the United States, for that matter. I mean, it's going to be $1 billion election coming up.
I'm actually glad you mentioned that. And Derrick, this is a question that I wanted to pose to you because experts like Chomsky are saying, look, everything that's going on right now is a way to deflect attention from the people who actually caused this crisis to happen in the first place. Your Lloyd Blankfeins, your J.P. Morgans, where are they? Why are we focusing on the teachers and the firefighters and people in the private and public sector and not these hedge fund managers and these Wall Street titans?
I'm actually very glad you asked that question because the point I was wanting to make earlier was that the folks that we're focusing on in a large part of this conversation, the unions in Wisconsin, are not the cause of the budget crisis in Wisconsin. And the crisis isn't about them. It's about Governor Walker's agenda. And he's, taking up the old hat that you never let a good crisis go to waste to whack your political opponents with. So it is very much a function of the corporate-owned media in the United States and the corporate-owned party in the United States, and the people that are working to turn out these faux protesters to counter-protest the labor unions in Wisconsin are funded by big corporations. They're funded by folks like the Koch brothers. They're funded by people who have a real interest in keeping their names off the front page, but in pushing this very regressive agenda that targets the groups specifically that stand in the way between them and control of the United States through the Congress and through their other politicians. This is all a smokescreen to prevent people from focusing on the real villains in the piece, and that's the banksters, and that's the big corporations run by folks like the Koch brothers who want the democracy in the United States to answer to business interests.
Gentlemen, I wish we had more time. I got to go for now. Tony Katz over there for us in Los Angeles. I know we want to come back soon for more. Derrick Crowe over in Texas, and Tom here in our D.C. studios. Thank you, gentlemen.